Now, I'm going to continue this series today, and I'm up to Detroit. Now, I'm going through teams alphabetically that have missed the playoffs. So that's why we're at Detroit today. And to some, this may seem like it's pointless. Well, we know how they missed the playoffs. They suck. No, stop it. Because Detroit, honestly, over the last couple years, they're kind of the underdog I've been pulling for. Because there's a lot of good young players here. And I don't have them on the board because this is just, looking over how they missed the playoffs and whatnot. We'll get into some other Detroit related stuff as we get into the summer. We get into re-signings, we get into guys who retire, this kind of thing. So for right now, this is just sort of a just general overview. They were 32, 40, and 10, I should say. They gained 1 point over where they were last year. So last year 74 points, this year 70, or last year 73 points, this year 74. Gotta love consistency. And what's interesting with them is we've talked about them being in cap hell before. A couple years ago, I believe I did a whole video on them being in cap hell and just here's where Detroit is and bleh. And it's not as bad now as it was. Some bigger contracts to guys that aren't necessarily producing for said contracts. Franz Nielsen at $5.25 million for another 3 years. Justin Abdelkader, famously, of course, $4.25 million a year until 2023, so 4 more years. Helm has $3.85 million in cap space eaten up for 2 more years, and Danny DeKeyser $5 million for another 3 years after this one. And on long-term injured reserve, you've got about $10 million locked up there. You've got Zetterberg at $6.08 million and Franzen at $3.95 million. They will never play again. So that's about $10 million that they have sitting on the long-term injured reserve. And it makes the whole putting a team together thing somewhat of a challenge. But it's getting better. UFAs for this year, Kronwall's $4.75 million comes off. He's very likely retiring. He said during the year, this is probably my last year. Probably going to retire, which means he likely does, unless this summer he says, I want to come back for another year. Vanek, $3 million, that comes off the books. Vanek, I don't know how much more interest there's going to be with Vanek. I could see Ken Holland re-signing him for another year at about that same amount of money. No big deal. And the important thing is they don't have anybody in the restricted free agent area that's somebody really worth worrying about. Like Martin Ferk is the one that I saw and I was like, they're fine. Ferk isn't going to get a big raise or anything. In goals for this year, this team finished 22nd, goals against 27th. So there are problems in their defense, their goaltending. I think their offense is decent, and I think towards the end of the year, it showed how Larkin, Bertuzzi, and Athanasiou are going to be 3 very key parts going forward with this team. Next year's salary, they're at $71.2 million. It shows that 18 out of 21 spots on the roster are taken, interestingly enough. Philip Zadina is expected to play. Hirose is going to end up playing. And so that's 20 spots. And I'm going by Cap Friendly's numbers. If the cap goes up to $83 million, that's about $12 million in cap space. The Detroit Red Wings could realistically be able to go out and get a free agent this year. They could go out in free agency and pick up a medium-sized free agent, the $5-6 million range, and they could actually make a move to improve. And if we're going to talk about Detroit, this is a team where I have to talk about the prospects. Zadina, Veleno, Berggren, and Holmstrom are your guys up front. With varying levels of ceilings, of course. Zadina is pretty solid. Veleno had an excellent after-draft year. Seems like he's on a bit of a mission to prove that him dropping in the draft offended him. On the blue line, they've got McIsaac and Sarajärvi are the ones that I wanted to throw on the board. McIsaac, of course, was, I think, 33rd overall they drafted him. Something like that. And he was a guy that, depending on how you look at it, either he kind of slipped a bit or depends on where you had him in the draft. And then they've just signed Larson. So they've got a goaltender in Larson that could be that next guy to take the reins because they've got Bernier and Howard coming back next year. And the jury's out on them as a tandem as far as I'm concerned. They They were both good during parts of the season. They were both miserable during parts of the season. Right in the middle, you get kind of meh, and that's probably about where their goaltending is. Probably about meh. But, we'll see. I mean, we've seen some great redemption stories in net this year. We could see one again next year. Now, where they lost it is right off the start. So, if you're coming into this video with an attitude of, oh, come on, they were never in it. You're right. They did, though, make things interesting at times this year. So, October 4th to 18th, they lost their first 7 games of the season. So, there you go. 7 straight losses. And they ended up losing 9 of their first 10. So, right out of the gate, just horrible season for them. But if you look at their record after that, they were only a couple of games below 500. Despite December 22nd to January 2nd, they lost 6 in a row. And that was a period where they lost 9 out of 10. So we're up to them losing 18 out of 20. And yet, they finish 8 games below 500. See, I can find the sunshine in any season. February 8th to 18, or February 16th till March 5th, they lost 8 in a row. That was in the midst of losing 12 out of 13. So 12 out of 13, 21 out of 23, 30 out of 33, and they still finish 8 games below 500. So they were hot at times, but when they got cold, they got really, really quite cold. This is not something that's a surprise when you're getting a new young core in there and Larkin's learning how to win, and that is the thing. And so I would expect next year there are fewer of these kinds of streaks. I would expect a better start out of the gate from Detroit next year, and I would expect some movement up. I really honestly think that Detroit is primed for a move up. Of course, Detroit fans were upset that the draft lottery results didn't come out in their favor. If Jack Hughes was being added to this lineup, I would be saying, yeah, Detroit should be back in the playoffs next year. But as long as their prospects, and there's a large number of decent prospects here, as long as a couple of their prospects can come into the lineup and produce next year, they're going to be in pretty good shape. I'm not going to say playoff shape, but I have been talking a lot about how I like Detroit and I like what they're doing. And I can totally understand why Ken Holland was given a contract extension when he was. And there are a lot of people still waiting, like, oh, Holland's not going to stay there. He's going to Seattle. They're going to fire him. They're going to bring in Yzerman. Until I see it, there's nothing to see here. There's nothing to report. But for me, with the Detroit Red Wings, yes, these lengthy losing streaks absolutely submarine their season. But the fact that they still gained a point off where they were last year, the fact that they didn't end up finishing anywhere near last in the league, at 74 points, they were, I want to say, 9 points ahead of last in the league, something like that. Like, just the fact that you can lose that many games in a row and still finish ahead of anybody says that when they played well, they played pretty well. And towards the end of the year, of course, they won. They had that nice long losing streak near the end of the year, or nice long winning streak near the end of the year. And it definitely helped prop this up. But I think it bodes for a better future for them next year. Now, whether that better future next year means they get 83 or 84 points and they're still out of the playoffs, or they make a big jump into the 90-95 point range and maybe make some noise for the playoffs, that's going to depend on what they do this summer and what kind of team they're able to formulate this year. And not only that, but can Jeff Blashill get the team into the playoffs? That's a big question. And I don't know that he's had a roster that can do it. Maybe in October, maybe he'll have that. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.